Here we are, Hired the Podcast. I'm Travis Miller. With me today, I have Chase Kocher. Chase is founder and CEO of Aim4Hire, a recruiting company that specializes in partnering with some of the most innovative tech companies out there, specifically focused on startups and emerging technologies. Is that right, Chase?
That's spot on, Travis. Thanks.
Dynamite. I love it when I nail the bio. Uh, Chase, I guess uh, easy place to start. What the hell is going on in the world of tech right now?
Yeah, I don't know how much time you have if we could fit it in the podcast, but it's certainly the last 3 to 6 months has been a sequence, and then obviously last week, or maybe I guess a week or two ago, with the SVB and the banking situation and what that impact has on venture capital, these companies, these groups that are investing in tech startups and the emerging tech kind of companies that we work with, and then obviously the companies themselves that we're banking with SVB and other players that are being impacted. I think it's kind of like every week it's like, well, what's going to be the deal this week in the tech space? Obviously I think Indeed just did a pretty big layoff, and Indeed has a big presence here in Austin, Texas, so we're feeling that this week. So it's just when you kind of thought maybe the layoffs were slowing down in the tech world, like kind of another big one happens, and then obviously the banking situation just kind of throws fuel on the fire, seemingly.
Yeah, well, with Indeed specifically, it's kind of I think a lot of it is the same old story that, for the past 2 years, there's been such a hiring boom and such a shortage of talent that I have a hunch they probably overhired, like a lot of the companies out there, whether it was purposeful or not, but just imagining that this growth trajectory was going to continue upward and onward forever and ever, and they hired with that in mind, and then the slightest dip, hiring slows just a little bit. There's not quite as many openings as there were in the biggest hiring boom economy that the world has ever seen, and all of a sudden they're just like, holy shit, we can't afford all of these people that we've hired over the last 2 years.
I think you're spot on. I mean, I think the overhiring, and it's hard to criticize in some ways because the tech space for a decade, even longer, it was just growth, growth, growth. And especially for startups, like, if they were receiving outside capital, the push is, keep pushing the envelope on numbers, revenue, growth trajectory. There really wasn't much accountability from either side, investors or the companies themselves, on like, are we profitable? I know even the early days of the Facebooks and Google and stuff like that, it was always, the value was always based on what they'll be in the future, or what they're on the run rate to achieve versus where they are right now. Yeah, I think kind of what you said. I mean, it's interesting because the job market, obviously there's more jobs than there are people, and unemployment's already as low as it's been, I think, in a long
Since the
time.
60s.
Right, but the tech space has its own unique problems, but I guess the job market in general. I mean, I know Indeed certainly services more than just the tech space. So I was kind of it would maybe make a lot of sense that they did overhire. They hired in positions that were kind of riskier, or weren't impacting the bottom line as much as they obviously wanted to see. I do think some of these companies are using this landscape as an opportunity to clean house a little bit, and kind of slim down their company, because partly because they probably overhired and overgrew, but I think some of them are just kind of evaluating what they have, and what they really are going to need the next 6 to 12 months.
Mm-hmm. As you talk to your customers, what's their outlook for the short term? What do they think the landscape's going to look like in 3 months, 6 months, or a year?
Yeah, the a lot of it is, especially if you're relying, if you're producing profits on your own, then right now it is lean, mean. Like, I need as many people as it'll take to hit this number. But once I have that number of people, like, I'm not going to exceed that head count, and we're just going to have to make it work. I think a lot of these startups, startups is a broad term, but any type of company that's really relying on outside capital to help them kind of move to that next stage, they're having a hard time raising additional outside capital because the valuations of their companies have dropped from what it was 6, 12 months ago. And so many of them weren't focused on profitability that it's kind of bit them in the tail a bit now, that they're having to kind of do layoffs, figure out if their product actually has a market fit. And if it does, how do you monetize that ASAP so you can stop burning cash at such a high rate? Mm-hmm. So I think the 6 to 12, to be fair, like I think there was optimism in the tech world probably like by mid to Q3 of this year. But with the SVB thing, and there's still a lot to be determined on kind of how that'll play out. Will that impact inflation again? Will that kind of start messing with company valuations and funding? I think a lot of companies right now are kind of just in a little bit of a unknown at this point.
Do you foresee a little bit of a plateauing of new companies, new technologies, more investment in traditional startup organizations?
I think so, and probably not like there. I don't think there'll be as many of those startups that you maybe read about in the news of like they're doing something super wacky, unique, cool. But it might not be a fit for 5 or 10 years, or it might be a new category that someone's trying to create. I think you're really going to struggle in a company like that, where it's like you're doing cool work, but does it actually generate money? Is there a need for that product? Or is it just a feature that your hope is one day Facebook will acquire you and they'll just feature it as a feature on the platforms that they offer? I think I was listening to another All In podcast or something like that, and just talking a lot about how there's like in the software space, there's a lot of these companies that are they're taking an app that's already created, but they're just creating a different customer base. So they're kind of almost not copycatting per se, but they're coming out with companies and they're just like specializing in dentists versus instead of private practice doctors or instead of hospitals. It's kind of like targeting little segments, but is there anything different about your software, or is it just something that really is just serving a different community that's already been, than your competition? So I think I think those kind of, I don't even know how to describe it. Like those just far-fetched type startups, I don't think there'll be as many of those in the news or receiving kind of the crazy amount of money some of those companies have been in the past.
So what impact has this had on your business, and how does a firm like yours weather these periods of change or uncertainty?
When we started the company, it was about 8 to 12 months until COVID hit. And then after COVID, obviously going through a little bit of that baby recession, and then, or I don't even know if it's technically a recession, but getting back to somewhat normal. And then obviously the landscape we find ourselves in now with kind of inflation skyrocketing, and now the banking issue and valuations of tech companies down tremendously from what it was 2 or 3 years ago. It's been a roller coaster, man. I think, to be honest with you, you really start to lean on the team you built, the company you put together, and hoping that you have the people that are built for that roller coaster of an environment. Because I think, in startups, like, some people go out and they try to hire people that are multifaceted and have high risk tolerance and kind of do whatever it takes mentality, like those cliches. In a lot of ways, we've been fortunate to have a team like that. So what we've done strategically is really just diversify the types of companies that we typically partner with. And instead of just kind of working with a standard software startup, we're trying to work in different industries there, in hopes that if the semiconductor space, which has kind of been growing from some government incentives, or if it's the renewables space where, again, there's been some, government incentive work there, or maybe an industry like healthcare where it's just pretty steady and there's always a need. Like that's kind of how we've shifted from working with kind of these sexy, cool software product companies that are trying to revolutionize the world versus these like steady, constant type companies that we know will be around.
Yeah. Well, we're old hat at weathering these challenges. I mean, we're about the same age, and I don't know if it's just the news cycle is so, it moves so fast now that you hear about more of it, but it just feels like for the past, 10, 12 years, we're going through what? Our 47th major global catastrophic event. You just kind of got to keep going. You just got to roll with it, and things happen. I'm just waiting for this monster mutant fungus to come our way and figure out what happens after that. SVB is already 4 news stories ago.
The Last of Us on HBO, yeah, has me worried.
Well, you didn't see that? The CDC literally warned about this highly infectious, incredibly deadly fungus that is starting to spread across the nation. No joke.
Not.
Like 2 days after The Last of Us airs its season finale, they put that announcement out.
Well, what does HBO know? Because I know HBO has a hit show that's about a fungus that takes over. It becomes zombie-like. Like you said, what's next? I know it was like the monkeypox were there for a little while in the middle of COVID. I'm not sure what happened to that, but to be fair, our generation, with us being, I don't know, 30s, 40s years of age, it's like, we certainly didn't go through the Great Recession. We haven't really been through a world war per se, though, who knows at this point. But it is, having this pandemic and the repercussions of that. If you're not agile as a business owner or even as an employee, I just don't think you're going to make it in this kind of economic business world that we now live in.
Mm-hmm. Well, with the shifting landscape, I think it could be pretty different out there for candidates, especially in the tech sector over the next year or two, where, I think candidates and highly sought after candidates have gotten a little fat and happy. Companies pursuing them left and right, these exorbitant salaries in order to get people on board. And it feels like that's going to shift a little bit, at least for a while. What do you think candidates can and should do to set themselves apart from people with similar backgrounds to them to try and land these coveted positions?
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head that, it's this leverage pendulum that, it was in favor of the employee or the candidate for, at least in the tech space, which is what I'll speak to mostly here because that's what I know. But, there was more demand for the talent than there was for the company or for talent to be in a company. So I think like you hit on it, that pendulum might be swinging a little bit. You're already seeing companies either offer a little bit less money or a little less of a benefits package as they had to during the prime days of tech. They're forcing kind of this back to office type strategy, among other measures. But to answer your question, to differentiate yourself, I think that's always been the trick in recruiting, hiring, interviewing, but you just might have a little less leverage than you did before. So if you are going up against candidates that have a similar resume to you, I think the measures you can take to kind of differentiate yourself from them in the interviews is very research heavy. It's probably leans more on your intangible skill set or your personality. And I'm a big research guy. Mm-hmm. I don't meet with anybody without stalking their LinkedIn profile and Googling them and trying to understand where they went to college, how they got to where they are in their career. I think those are little things that can move the needle, because at the end of the day, when you're interviewing, it is people with people. At least right now, you're not interviewing with robots. So you don't need to give the robotics perfect answer to certain questions. I think you need to understand who your audience is. And if that's a hiring manager, if it's a C-level executive, you need to understand who they are, what they do every day, and trying to understand with the role you're interviewing for, how can you ask the right types of questions that person would be kind of impressed by. Mm-hmm. And or you try to make the non-work personal connection of, I saw you went to the University of Chicago. We used to play them in basketball when I played college basketball, and get the conversation going that way. Because you find hiring managers that want to hire the perfect worker, and then you have hiring managers that want to hire the person they can have a beer with. And whether one's right or wrong, and certainly there's a middle ground, but I think you kind of want to identify that when you're interviewing, and I think that can help set you apart from the 5 other people that might have the same experience as you.
Yeah, but neither side can be bullshit. You can't fake it. You can't. On the work side, you really gotta try and understand the problem that this position is trying to solve. How are you going to make somebody's life easier, better, make things move faster, make them more money, help them be more successful? And how can you solve that problem? And on the flip side, on the personal side, I hate it when I have like a salesperson reach out to me and be like, "Hey, you're from Chicago. How you like deep dish pizza?" It's like, come on. You can feel the fake when somebody is trying to. They're not trying to connect with you because they want to connect with you. They're trying to find the lowest common denominator of connection just for the sake of that. And so how does a person do both those things? You talked earlier about, highlighting the intangibles. How can somebody really, really do that? Figure out what their intrinsic value is, what makes them amazing on the inside, and highlight that to the people that they're talking to.
It's easier said than done, but it's something that it takes practice. So on a side note, take as many interviews as you can get. I think you've got to, getting comfortable and having that practice, I think is always something that I would encourage. And also you might connect with somebody that you end up, you looking at the company and the job description you were iffy about. But once you speak with the person that might be your boss, the game could change if you guys really connect or really get along in a certain way. So I think you're spot on in like trying to find, instead of getting generic answers of, yeah, I've done this or I've done that, thinking about the job and thinking about that manager and how to make their life easier, and then give demonstrations or give tangible examples of kind of maybe when you went above and beyond, or maybe when you kind of exercise your intangible skill set to achieve something. I think, again, it sounds a bit generic, but I do think aside from just answering with, I did this, I did that, I think giving it a specific example of when you handled ambiguity or you handled an opportunity where you kind of went above and beyond, just to demonstrate kind of the type of worker that you would be to that hiring manager.
Yeah, I think so many candidates fall in the trap of they do too good of a job at answering questions and don't take enough time to ask questions. I mean, it really should be a conversation. This is a two-way street. And when the person you're interviewing with, when they ask you a question, I don't think you always know exactly what they're asking. And unless you can converse, unless you can ask clarifying questions to really try and uncover what they're asking, why they're asking it, and what answer they're hoping you're going to give, you're just kind of guessing when you answer their first question. And there's still that almost subservient mentality that I think candidates have, that no matter what the economic situation is, they still feel like they're interviewing for a job and they should be grateful to have that opportunity, whether it's conscious or subconscious. But no matter how far the pendulum swings, it still needs to be a two-way street, and they still need to take ownership of really understanding what the questions are being asked and why they're being asked. It's so hard to do because we've been ingrained for so long that you need to answer the question as best you can instead of trying to understand why the question is being asked.
That's deep, and I love that. I think you gotta. Sometimes a good question is the best answer. I think if you can probe, what we do formerly in sales. In sales, you want to be the first one to ask a question in a conversation, and you want to probe until you understand what the landscape is, and therefore, when you get the questions back, you know how to answer them according to what you learned in those first 3 or 4 questions that you got to shoot off. I think the Chicago and pizza thing is pretty weak.
So
I'd hope that no recruiter of mine has ever sent anything like that. But like you said, maybe if it's a genuine connection or something that changes the quote unquote stranger to stranger interview to a conversation or to a more personal, relaxed, informal type conversation. However you can disarm that situation, I think it's worth at least kind of calculating or kind of taking into account measures you could take to kind of bring those walls down. Because listening in and conducting interviews myself, so much of it is you get the formal answer. Like you said, like people are so good at formally answering questions they've, you Google the top interview questions to answer, I'm sure they're just like scripting it off. So I think, how genuine can you get, and how can you kind of bring those walls down as soon as you can within that interview?
Mm-hmm. And for the interviewer too, I mean, to be able to not just ask those top 5 popular interview questions. Tell me a little bit about yourself. Tell me about a time you've been challenged. What's your biggest weakness? Who cares?
Right.
None of that means anything.
Well, there's not a lot of training goes into, like, some people become managers and then they just, they're taught, like, these are the documents and the paperwork I need from you every week documenting how your team's doing. They don't really talk about, like, how to interview and identify talent, or to vet out and determine, like, what you need on your team. I think, I always use basketball analogies, but it's like a team of 5 Michael Jordans might not work as well as one Michael Jordan, a bunch of role players, not a bunch, a couple role players. Obviously, Scottie Pippen, I'm not calling him a role player, but you get my drift. Is like, you need the guys that are willing to rebound like Dennis Rodman and do the dirty work. You need the guys that can shoot threes. I think putting together a great team, it doesn't always mean you need to hire the 5 best people or best resumes you've ever seen.
Well, it was you. I was doing exactly what you were talking about before, stalking your LinkedIn profile, and you just posted that video from Adam Grant, right? About the Miami Heat, and how one of the biggest pieces to the Miami Heat's success was Shane frickin' Battier, or how there was a study that World Cup qualifying teams, the most World Cup qualifying teams, didn't have the most amount of talent. There's a level where star power becomes a diminishing return. And, to kind of take it back to the skills that people don't have, it's a huge flaw in the business world that the people that do well get promoted to leading, and they get no training in leading. And the people that do well in leading get promoted to a position to hire people to bring onto the team, and they get no training in how to do it. And hiring someone to your team or deciding to join a company are some of the most important decisions you're ever going to make in your life, and definitely some of the most important business decisions you're ever going to make in your life. And nobody's got any training in it at all. Most people are terrible at it. They're terrible at interviewing. They're terrible at being interviewed. How do they get better? How do they get better, Chase?
Well, if I had the perfect answer here, I'd be making more money than I'm making right now. I'll tell you that. I'd be interested on your take as well, obviously, but I think, as a candidate, as an interviewer, but also as the interview, if you're a company and you're trying to improve your ability to identify and talent, I think a lot of it's old school, man. I think a lot of it is research. It is talking with people that are managers that have had that experience before, reflecting on what good and bad decisions they made. I will say, somebody that's been in management for 5 or 10 years, they probably, especially if you have a genuine relationship with them, they could share some quality advice on maybe some mistakes they made and some things they felt like they did well. But ultimately, I think that's the uniqueness of being a hiring manager and being in a position like that is you can add your own flavor to an interview process. You can find a different way to identify talent. I don't think, I'm sure there's a lot of books and articles on it, but I would imagine that if you could find somebody within your network that's been there, done that, and get them to candidly kind of talk about the horror stories of maybe the wrong things they did and probe on the things they did right, that could be helpful. But in a job market like today, where it's just changing constantly, I'm not even sure somebody that did it 5-10 years ago is going to be able to have relatable stuff to what we do now. I mean, certainly some relatable things, but things are changing.
Yeah. So I know the pendulum appears to be swinging a little bit back towards, away from this ridiculously strong candidate-driven market. But I don't think it's going to swing that far. And I think companies are still going to be competing for top talent. It's just inevitable with the amount of people leaving the workforce and not enough people replacing them. There's going to be a shortage of talent. Maybe not as much as there has been for the last year, but it's still going to be there. So companies are still going to have to differentiate themselves, sell their organizations, sell their opportunity, and endear themselves to great people out there. What can companies do on the flip side to set themselves apart as a great place to come and work?
That can be that's probably one of the greatest challenges I have when we work with a new company is instead of that first interview being Travis, sit down, I'm about to grill you for an hour as the first interview. You now have to account for the fact that supply and demand, you have more jobs than there are people. You have to pitch this person on why they should join you versus why should you hire them. And it depends on the skill set and the pendulum. I mean, I think in tech specifically, it has shifted a little more than maybe the rest of the job market itself. But even there, I mean, the demand for software tech talent is always going to be high. So I think a company has to kind of consider and be willing to check their ego at the door, especially in that first or second interview. You really got to kind of not just vet them, but you also need to kind of maybe, I hate the word sell in this case, but maybe you need to educate them on this is what our company's about. This is what our team is about. This is the problem we're solving. This is why we're going to be around for 5 or 10 years. This is why this would be a great opportunity for someone like you. I see you moving around. You have some thoughts on that one?
Well, I just don't think selling is a bad word but it depends on your definition of selling. If you think of the traditional, no offense to used car salesmen, but in my mind, plaid jacket used car salesman, let's get you in a vehicle today. And in my mind, which one am I going to make the most margin on? But if you think of kind of the more new age philosophy on selling is, all right, let's understand what's the value that you need in your life. Let's figure out what's a great opportunity for you, what's a good organization for you, what's a company that's going to allow you to thrive, what are the things you enjoy doing most in work, what do we have to offer that would be enjoyable, fulfilling, rewarding, grow you professionally. Let's take the time in the interview to really understand that. And then if we have that here, I can sell you the value of our organization. So from that point of view, I think you do need to sell the opportunity. Yeah. But it's more of the new age sales mentality of, I'm going to bring value to the people that need the value I can bring them.
I think that's why I have reluctancy just in general to use the word sell when we're talking about recruiting. A lot of people talk about recruiters kind of being like salespeople, but it's a little bit easier and it's more people focused. And I don't know if that's fair or not, but the sales part is, when you, especially as a recruiter, when a company hires you to find them talent, you are now a representative of that company. Like you are now an extension of that company. So we do have kind of a responsibility to go out and talk to candidates and kind of sell them / educate them / share information in a persuasive way on why that company has the things that candidate might be looking for in their next career step. So I'm with you. I think to a degree, selling, is especially a new way of selling that maybe is more personalized and genuine and not just driven by financial gain or margins. If you can do that, then yes, I would certainly lean into that because you're spot on and they're going to have options. So why would they choose your company over another unless they feel like you actually genuinely cared about them and or they have like your company has the opportunities that person wants in their next job. So I do think, but it's difficult for hiring managers because I think a lot of them, maybe when they were interviewing, depending on how many years ago it was, it might have been a very different interview process. And I think a lot of hiring managers have a hard time kind of letting that wall down and understanding that the game has changed a little bit, that they have to pitch the candidate, not the other way around. So I think that can be a tough landscape to adjust to, but you have to, or you're going to lose. You're going to lose if you don't.
And I love the way you phrased it there earlier, where, when you partner with a company as a recruiter, you become an extension of that organization. You become a representative out there in the market, which is why it drives me crazy when a recruiter's trying to work with a company and they're speaking with one individual at the organization, and that individual puts a wall up. And they say, I'm the conduit. Everything goes through me. Don't talk to anybody else in the organization. I've given you all the information that you need. You should be able to find a candidate that's right for this job. That's that old mentality that this is the job. We need a resume that matches this job description. You'll bring them to us, and they will be grateful to come and work for our organization. But it's not the case. We need the companies that are going to thrive in any market, but particularly in a tough candidate-driven market, are the organizations that understand that recruiting is a contact sport. It's a game where you need to go out there and you need to be in front of people, and the more information you can have, the more stories that you know, the more you understand what an organization is doing and the value that they can bring to somebody, to circle it back, then the better you can be at being that conduit, at being that representative for the organization out there in the marketplace to identify and attract, and whether it's a bad word or not, sell the opportunity to the people that deserve to have it sold to them.
Yeah. You change, adapt or die. I mean, some of these companies, hiring managers and candidates, you got to understand that things are changing. And I think if you aren't willing to get with that and try to better, like you said, maybe educate, sell candidates on things, your team won't be performing because you're understaffed, and then your ass is in the hot seat, not in reverse. So I think you got to find a way. But what you said was too often true, is that the hiring manager, we have these issues all the time where we'll have a hiring manager, like, they'll love 10 candidates, and the next stage of the interview process is an interview with the team or with another stakeholder, and they go do that and they keep bombing it. Mm-hmm. And it's like, what's going on here? And it's like, okay, well, you have a hiring manager that just kind of knows exactly what they think they want in a job description they think that they created, but the rest of the team isn't aware that that's what this role is. And some of these companies, they use the same job description over and over. They're like, they have the same team. It's like, okay, we're hiring another one, like same job description as 6 months ago. And it's like, that's a little concerning, but
same
okay.
Job description as 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. And job description, that's a whole different conversation. I think there are unique ways to write, job descriptions. I do think there needs to be a little more focus maybe on kind of what exactly you're looking for. That's not just cut and dry like everybody else's, but how do you differentiate it from everyone else's? It's tough. Yeah. When you have, a page and a couple paragraphs, because like you said, you don't really get the opportunity in a job description to ask the candidate, what are they looking for? What's their motive? Because if their motive is career mobility, like, you might have not put that in the job description because you weren't thinking that way, and you lose out on a great candidate that could have been a good fit.
Yeah. Job descriptions are tough. Job descriptions and resumes they're tough because, what's the goal of a job description? What's the goal of a resume? It's to start the process. That's all a resume is for, is to get you that first ounce of consideration. What's a job description for? It's for a candidate to see it and say, that's a job I could be interested in doing. And I was talking to a woman the other day, and she said once a candidate is interviewing with her, she barely talks about the job at all. Because if you're sitting in front of her, she knows you can do the job. She knows you have the background to do it. You have the minimum amount of qualifications to be successful at the job. And she focuses on everything else. She focuses on all that intrinsic stuff that you were talking about that really sets people apart, because that's the stuff that can't be seen in a resume. And I think a candidate should almost take the same philosophy where I've already read the job description. I know it's a job I can do. I know it's a job I'm interested in doing that work. I'm going to spend all my time interviewing about the company, about the culture, about the vision, about the future, about the potential, because I already know about the job. I want to know about everything that's not in the job description. So how do candidates interview for that? How do they really dig in beyond what the job is to figure out if it's an organization they want to be at for years and years and years to come?
Yeah, you certainly look at the company mission and value statement, although I don't know how much weight that carries. I think maybe you did, and I also don't know if you necessarily go to Glassdoor and base your entire opinion off that either. So there are companies that have attempted to try to bridge this gap, but I don't know if they've effectively done it. I think using a LinkedIn or something like that, where you can look at other employees at that company, you can look at their backgrounds. Again, we're kind of leaning back into research and maybe just seeing if people kind of have shared about the environment that company's created. And depending on how big or small they are, that might, some teams are going to be different than others at a big corporation. So it's hard to just generalize that one team has a cutthroat mentality, then the entire company's cutthroat. I don't know. I honestly, I don't know the answer to that question, aside from using the interviews as your way to start detecting things, and then using your network to ask around and see if you have any mutual connections or you have any backdoor ways of kind of finding out what that company's about, what their environment and culture are like. Because every website has this is our job environment, this is our teams, and here are our values. Maybe researching some of the work they do outside of just work. Is there any give back? Is there any community service type work? Doesn't always mean they'll be a great company if they do those things, but those could be good signs. Do you have any thoughts on that besides those things?
I think so much of it has to be in the interview. I think anything you read online has to be taken with a grain of salt. Glassdoor, they're primarily going to be negative reviews because people don't. So I don't know. The stuff a company puts on their website, I don't know. You take it with a grain of salt. It might have been true at one point, but you never know. But I think it's the questions you ask during the interview. And if you have genuine curiosity about these topics, then the good companies are going to give you answers to it. If an interviewer starts getting frustrated with you about asking about the future of the organization, what possible roles could you play in it? What's the mission of the company? What's the vision? How does this role affect that? How does this role play a part in it? If somebody gets frustrated with you asking those questions, I generally don't think that's a company you're going to want to go work for.
For sure. It can be tough, even in those interviews, like you said, to detect, how genuine the response is, because if they give you a cookie cutter, our values are trust, team, and environment, and like you said, you have to take it with a grain of salt, but you also kind of you want to try to probe and really get a feel. But it can be tough as a candidate interviewing. I mean, firsthand, I had that experience before starting this company. It's just, you really sometimes never know what you're getting into until you step into that office day one.
Tell me about that. What was the experience?
Yeah.
No, it sounds like you got a story there. Well, you said you experienced that. I want to hear the story.
To be fair, I've had 2 jobs prior to starting this company 4 years ago, so I don't have a lot of experience, and it'd be pretty easy to figure out which company I'd be talking about. So, to be honest, it was really the last company I was with would hit on what you're saying as far as the resume really just being the first step, because the first interview I conducted, we went through my resume, and then after that, most of the people I interviewed with hadn't seen my resume, had no idea what college I went to, what I did before then. But to be fair, they put a lot of value on knowing me as a person. And if I had that skill set, they cared less about my quote unquote experience and more about who I was about and what I wanted to achieve. So I give them a lot of credit for that. But I think, companies are all different. I think sometimes I've just had too many candidates that I've recruited, in the past that thought the job would be one thing and they get in there and it's different. And as a startup, especially, a lot of the companies we work with, they're super conscientious of that. I'm personally conscientious of that when I'm interviewing people, because we're a 15-person company. So if you think you can come in and you're going to work 9 to 4 and there's going to be all this process and structure, that is not the case. And I do my best to articulate that. But I think, sometimes you either don't get that across, or maybe you're not as blunt as you need to be on the bad parts of the job. Because every job, there is something that the candidate and the employee is not going to want to do. And I think as an interviewer, sometimes you have to be candid about, here are the selling points, but also here are our shortcomings. Here's where we really suck, and hopefully you can come in and be, help improve that. or you can bring ideas on how we could fix that. I've always appreciated companies that really were kind of open about the good, bad, and the uglies of their group and the company before they talk about the job.
Yeah. You don't want a candidate to be surprised when they're so excited to get started.
Right. Right. And in the market, I mean, like, we've been pretty good economically over the years, but, if someone's really desperate for a job, they start overlooking the things that might be problemsome, or they just don't calculate it into their decision, and then they get in and realize that they made a huge mistake. And I feel for those people, because that's just I'd imagine that's just a terrible situation to be in if you get into a job and it ends up just being a disaster.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure it's not for people that go work for Aim4Hire. So, Chase, this has been great. Any last thoughts to add? Anything else you want to add to the conversation?
No, man, I'm grateful for it, and I appreciate being on the show, and hopefully it meant something to any of the listeners on just kind of discussing hiring, man. Changing by the day.
This has been great. If people want to get a hold of you, what should they get a hold of you for, and how should they get in touch with you?
If they're interested in emerging tech startups, small to medium-sized tech companies in Austin, and then we work with a couple other companies kind of across the U.S., give me a holler. Or if you just need help interviewing or just want to talk shop, I'm always up for that. LinkedIn, Chase Kocher, Kocher. I live on LinkedIn as a recruiter, so that's probably the best place to hit me. And then our website, you can find my email and all types of things on there as well.
Chase, this has been great. Really appreciate it. Thanks to our producer, Noah Cuff. Noah, this has been fantastic. I'm Travis Miller with Hired the Podcast. Talk to you soon.